From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. I'm Betsy Peterson, the director of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you today to the latest presentation of our Benjamin A. Botkin lecture series, and I should say this is the first of our 2013 season. The Botkin series is a great opportunity for the American Folklife Center to showcase the latest research in folklife, folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, and cultural heritage. And it also allows us the opportunity to enhance our collections through acquisition. And so for the center and the library, this is an important series for us. Each lecture is videotaped and recorded and will become part of the permanent collection of the archives. So I would suggest actually right now, if you have cell phones turned on, to please turn them off unless you want to be memorialized in our archive. And later, within a few weeks, this very lecture will be put up on the website and will be available to people all over the world. Today, I have the honor of introducing a good colleague and friend, Diana Baird-Njai, or Dr. Diana Baird-Njai, I should say, a distinguished folklorist and a crosstown colleague at the Smithsonian Institution's Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. For many years, Dr. Njai has been the leader and director and guiding force behind the Will to Adorn, African American Dress and the Aesthetics of Identity, which is a massive pan-institutional, multi-sided research project that has been ongoing for the last few years and will be the basis of her presentation today for all of us. It will also form the basis of a major exhibition program at the Smithsonian Festival, Folklife Festival on the National Mall this coming summer. So come out and brave the July heat for a fabulous program. Dr. Njai is a native of Brooklyn, and Diana's training includes background in anthropology, folklore, and visual studies. She attended New York's Fashion Institute of Technology, and she holds a PhD in anthropology and visual studies from the Union Institute. In addition to her work as a scholar, she has also maintained a distinguished career as a studio artist, and her work as both a scholar and an artist has informed over 30 years of fieldwork, exhibition, programs, and publications focusing on expressive culture in Africa and the Caribbean and their diasporas in the United States. Other areas of research include children's play and performance and dress traditions and fashion in Oman, Mali, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Japan. She served as curator for numerous Smithsonian Folklife Festival programs, including major programs on Senegal, Bermuda, and Haiti. And in fact, after the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti, Diana led the Smithsonian support of Haitian traditional artists at the Folklife Festival for that year, and she has served on innumerable national and international juries, as well as advisory policy and funding panels for institutions such as UNESCO, the NEA, and the American Folklore Society. I could probably keep going, but I think I'll stop here. We're delighted to have Diana Njai with us today, and we're pleased that she's able to take time from her schedule to join us for this Botkin lecture. So please join me in welcoming Diana.
Thank you very much, and I really want to thank my colleagues at the American Folklife Center. We're sort of twins joined at the hip in some ways, and Betsy Peterson, Dr. Betsy Peterson, Nancy Gross, Kathy Kirst, Jennifer Theo Peter. There's so many people here, and I do look out in the audience and I see that I'm really among friends and colleagues. Sally Vanderwater, who is the project director for the Youth Access Grant we have for the Will to Adorn, Olivia Cardeval, my colleague and a mentor and at the center. So what I thought is that today what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about do a little bit of memoir and sort of personal journey, as well as a conversation about dress and identity and community within that. And in fact, most of the projects that I've worked on over the decades have started out with a cultural autobiography of sorts. And I like to think that in a project, we work a lot with community researchers, and there's sort of a concentric circle. You know, it's important to think about your own culture and what you're doing, and then you widen it a little bit. You know, you go from yourself to your family community to your community, and then you can look at other communities and have some point of resonance and relationship, because there are so many things that are resonate obviously with other communities, and that's one of the things about that I love about folk life, that you know, everyone belongs to at least, well, many communities, not even one, but many. You know, there's where you work, there's your family, there's, you know, where your background, your heritage, your region, and these all come together to make you the person that you are. So the first thing we do when we talk about the Will to Adorn, and I'll talk about the project a little later, is we ask people to write a cultural autobiography or sartorial autobiography, which means an autobiography that deals with dress. And what we ask is things like, you know, what stories did your family tell you about how to dress, or how, even more importantly, how not to dress? And were there any incidents that involved, you know, what people wore? What sayings referred to dress? And who were the exemplars of style in the family? Who are the people who, you know that they were going to be dressed to the max, you know, whenever they went out? And one researcher that is working with us remembered that her dad had a pair of shoes for every occasion. So it's not only women. People think about the Will to Adorn, a lot of times they think about women as the exemplars of style, but you know, you guys are also very much exemplars of style. And one researcher remembered that, you know, her father had so many suits in many colors, and within my own family, and within many families of African descent, a lot of the stories and a lot of the sayings also had to do with the realities of being a person of African descent in America. And it was also an issue of survival. It had to do with the double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, that because as people of color, we were assumed to be less based on that skin color. And appearance took on, and still takes on, a very important role as a symbol and an expression of liberation. And there's the whole thing between, you know, we self-identify, we fashion ourselves, but we also are identified and profiled, you know, so that whole self-representation thing is really important. In fact, there were sumptuary laws passed during slavery, and enslaved Africans couldn't dress better than the folks who enslaved them. And there, I remember how many people have seen Django Unchained? Okay, so you know that there's that scene where when Django is liberated, the first thing he goes and he gets this bright blue suit, you know, and he takes it off afterwards, but the whole thing is, hey, this is, you know, I can wear what I want to. And here I am. So dressing well in African American culture has always been a measure of freedom and aspiration, but also an expressive form, and one in which we have invested time and money. And Zora Neale Hurston called the will to adorn the most important expression of Negro culture. Um, she was talking about words, but I think it also went for her own dress as well as dress. So I'm going to start going through these slides. Um, so a sartorial autobiography. Okay. When I was born in New York City, and my parents were actually relatively recent immigrants from the Caribbean. My dad was from Barbados, and my mom was from Guyana. And one of the things that I heard stories about was the fact that my dad, who was a student at the time, was also working to work his way through college as an orderly in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And he talked about the importance of wearing a suit. He may have just had one or two suits, but he always wore a suit and a bow tie. And it had as much to do with sort of the as aspirational, as well as the fact of making sure that when he went out, he was looked at as respected, and it was, for him, it was protection. So when he was talking to his grandson, my son, who's wearing his jeans and so on, and he was talking about the fact, well, you've got to dress in a certain way because it's your protection. My mom actually came from Georgetown, Guyana, and in Georgetown, she came to the United States to learn hairdressing and cosmetology, actually to take back to Guyana. So she was really an incredible exemplar of style. She was my first sort of model for how you're supposed to dress. And but very soon after I was born, I ended up with my grandmother in Bermuda. And there's a tradition, I think, within the African world about the parents are working in the city, and children go back to be with the grandmother, whether it be down south or in the islands and so on. So I was with my grandmother, and so this is a picture. I'm about maybe 2 years old, a little less, and I want you to look at at my hand. I'm the little one over there, and there's a bangle, and it's a gold bangle, and every self-respecting young person of Caribbean descent, from Trinidad and Guyana, had a bangle. And the bangle became, when we came over, a symbol of that identity, but it was also something, it has a really interesting history. This bangle was made in my grandfather's, by an apprentice of my grandfather. My grandfather had died by the time I was born, but it actually came from an East Indian tradition. And in Trinidad and in Guyana, there was a very large there is a very large Indian population, and also a lot of really complex relationships. But this, in New York City, was still a symbol of being Caribbean. That, and when I was growing up, it was having at least one gold tooth. So, it became a really important symbol of a community that I belonged to. This is actually my mom with her parents, and my grandfather, Colin Alexander Young, was also known as Tommy the Jeweler, and so in the Guyana of the 1920s and 30s, there was a growing sort of administrative colonial class, and there were a lot of obviously inequities and so on in the society, but there was also people dressed, and people would save up their money to buy gold and go into the gold. My grandfather would go in the gold fields as far as Suriname and French Guiana, and so many people have come home with that, with symbols of being Guyanese, with that yellow gold and filigree jewelry and so on. So getting through that, so I went to many transformations, and I'm sure you've all done that. You know, when was the first time that you started dressing for yourself rather than dressing for your family? And, you know, what were the kind of messages that you got? On the left is from Bermuda. And the right, I started out in design, so that was during the 70s. And the right, when I was a young woman who, you know, just recently married and from a Muslim in a Muslim family in Brooklyn. That was another photograph. And then I'm just going to go through here. And some of my early research was in Senegal, where where dressing is very much a fine art, and people pay so much attention to detail. And for me, it was really a transformative experience because it taught me a lot about some of the roots in the African world of some of the aesthetics of dress. You know, the project is called the Aesthetics of Dress. And even in very small villages where there was not a lot of material resources, people also paid so much attention to making sure that their hair was braided, that you wouldn't go out of the house, even to the marketplace, without being dressed well. And later on, this is me with my husband's nieces and aunts and so on. And later on, I remember at the Folklife Festival, we did a program called African Immigrant Community Culture, and it was looking how African immigrants make a home in a new place. And I was wearing this same outfit, which had gone through a lot of, which had been worn quite a bit. And it's interesting. Some of the folks, who I knew from outside the Senegalese community came over and said, "Oh, that's a really great dress, and it looks really dressed up." The Senegalese came over to me and said, the Senegalese women came over and said, "You know, sister, if you don't have a lot of clothes, we can help you out. We can hook you up, So the differences in the kind of attention to detail was really important. And so recently I've gone back a lot. This is in 2006, and this is my husband was born in a small village in Njilassem, called Njilassem, in the midsection of Senegal, and this is on a trip back, and I hope that I got a little bit of the lesson, but again, the importance of dress is really important. So, as I said, as folklorist and anthropologist, Zora Neale Hurston observed the will to adorn is still about that. And she wrote about that. She wrote about how embellishment of dress it was really so important, and not only for survival, but just as an expressive art form. And so it's not just personal statements of style. It really is part, and this is what we've learned more and more through our research. We've looked at a lot of diverse communities, but the constant is how important dress and style is. Whether you're wearing hijab, whether you're wearing a gele, whether you're wearing a church hat, whether you're wearing locks or hip hop people study dress, so that's and dress becomes a visual vocabulary, so that it's an avenue of mastery, and people have done a lot of work so far on African American music, on dance, but not as much on this area. And what does dress convey? Status and entitlement, and the aspiration to the middle class, as we talked about before. Ethnicity and entitlement. Affiliation, and the statement of dress is being such an important statement. And of course, cool. And I think this picture is very, it's so significant in terms of the placement. And I was saying, wow, that could have been, that same stance really, it could have been Denzel, it could have been Malcolm, it could have, it's really interesting that this would be the statement of cool. And I'm going to come back to our president in a little while, because I think that there's a conversation I want to talk about in the end. But we talk about the exemplars of dress, but we also talk about the artisans of style, those people who support the communities of style. And when we talk about the artisans of style, we're talking about the hairstylists, the locticians, the braiders, the tailors, the people who had clothing stores in African American communities, in African American neighborhoods, when you couldn't go to Woody's or to try on stuff. And Jano Umoja, who many of you know, who's a Washington Master of the Arts, is part of our project, a very important part of our project as a cultural practitioner. And she is an artist as well, and a dress artist as well. And so she, I think, exemplifies what we're talking about when we're talking about artisans of style or artists of style. But we also have artists from different communities. Veronica Abu is from Ghana, and she works with African fabrics that, and she designs and sews for her own community. She also has a very strong practice, especially with Afrocentric weddings, with weddings that where people within the African American community who may not be wearing African dress every day want to reflect heritage in what they wear. Vanilla Bean, many people knew Vanilla Bean as a milliner in the Washington D.C. area, and again the millinery shops. Someone yesterday, Francine, we were having a conversation actually about women saving up their pennies to buy Mr. What was the name of the place? Mr. John. Was it you? Oh no, it wasn't you. I'm sorry. I was talking with another colleague actually about who had worked in a department store that had Mr. John hats, and she said that people would be putting their dollars together, and they would be women within the African American community. Would come in just around Easter time and then buy out the Mr. John hats, and it was such an important and powerful symbol of community, and it's been reflected at the festival. This is hair braider. Many of you may know if you're Washingtonian, Shabu, doing here at the Folklife Festival in 1975. The barber shop. This is Denny Moe. Denny Moe is a barber in New York City who's been documented by one of our community partners, Mind Builders Association, which is a folk cultural research internship program for teenagers, for high schoolers. And for about 2 years, they've been working, 3 years, they've been working with us to photograph and interview people within their communities who are these artisans of style. And Denny Moe is known as barber to the stars. He's cut Snoop Dogg's here, and he's cut a range of people, but he still is a very much a community barber. And so you go in there and you're having conversations, and there's even a video. If you look for Denny Moe, there's online on the internet, you'll see that there's even a video about that he's made with his staff. And one of the arenas for the presentation, one of the arenas for the presentation of dress is the hair shows. And the African American entrepreneurship has been so important in terms of this arena of barbershops, beauty parlors. And it's the barbers and the beauty shop owners that have often, along with the churches, been the folks who have supported civil rights, who have supported community organizing at a grassroots level. And because their clientele, are folks from the African American community. So I'm going to go through here. There's a continuity of tradition that, you see in terms of Africanisms all over the world. This is a picture I took in Suriname with folks who are maroon communities, but all over you see these same skills that have been retained through the experience through slavery, but also come back to us through new African diasporan folks. And Astu Aj is one of the first women to open up a braiding salon in Washington, D.C. After Cornrows and Companies. Cornrows and Companies was actually one of the first, but then Astu Aj was one of the first, I should say, African immigrant women to open up the community. So, when we're looking at the project, we're looking at the diversity within the African American community as well as the overall aesthetics and how clothing and how dress defines and the African American fraternities and sororities definitely self-define and bond through dress. And Elizabeth Keckley, we talked about the importance in the larger sphere. She was a community organizer. She was within her community, in addition to being Mary Todd Lincoln's dressmaker, she already had a very strong practice. And Madam C.J. Walker, Rosa Parks, some of those folks who were involved in the industry, but also were important for this. So the body arts include the design and construction of clothing, and the jewelry, cosmetics, and other arts. And I'm going to go through this here. So the Will to Adorn, as Betsy Peterson mentioned, is a multi-year project where we're looking at actually the diversity of the African American identities as communicated through cultural aesthetics. And we've talked a lot about the commonalities, but a very important conversation that needs to take place. I think, just as the United States is looking at redefining who we all are as Americans in terms of the new demographics. There's also new demographics within the African American population, within the African American community, and or not so new, but the importance of recognizing this new demographics is important. It played a real important part in the election. If you remember, there were all the questions. What is it? Who is it to be African American? And is it someone whose dad is from Kenya, and whose mom is from Kansas? Is it someone who's come over, who survived slavery in America? Is it, all of the communities within the African American larger population help to self-define through many things, but dress is one thing. And so what we want to do, and I'm going to go through this, we have to recognize that there's not one authentic African American aesthetic, but many. And that we need to look at this in a global thing. We need to look at communities of style. We need to look at communities of artisans of style, and the relationship between style and the changes of style in the African American community. You know, how from the Afro as worn in the 70s to the big chop. And for the big chop, many younger African Americans have looked at going away from the practice of straightening hair and going to wearing hair naturally. And I think that it's a combination of consciousness, but in a little different way from in the 70s. It's also, I think, bringing together the environmental and health consciousness in terms of, you know, why do you want to put chemicals in your hair? How can we express our identity as African Americans by wearing our hair naturally? So the project is a multi-partnered collaborative project. We're working with several researchers in 7 major cities in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The research was completed by students and community members. And social media and video and photography and oral history are really a very important part of the project. So these students here are at Yard Fest in Howard University, but we've done projects with Spelman. We had courses at Bowie State. And we have been working to create a research protocol that works the way that Facebook works, so that researchers are connected online, and just as you can upload blogs, you can upload photographs and so on onto Facebook, you can do the same thing with social media. So we've had a wonderful set of conversations online. And finally, we're going to be doing a Folklife program that's going to bring some of this together. And these are some of the themes that we have. We'll have performances and exhibitions this summer on the Folklife at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, including Rock the Runway, where we'll not only have fashion shows, and you know, there's a tradition of African American fashion shows, which I like to see as visual concerts. You know, and they're you know, if there are church concerts, there are church fashion shows, there are fashion shows that are put together by youth, but there's also the whole tradition of styling and profiling and rocking the runway. So we want to do that. Explorations of cultural markers of immigrant communities. The narrative tent, which we want to style as a beauty parlor and a barber shop, will really give us a chance to have talks about the issues around African American dress, and you know, as they are sites of discussion. We will have demonstration tents, design studios dealing with the artisans of style, so bringing folks to talk about how they started, how they learned, you know, who they mentored, you know, the actual, you know, where their aesthetic is coming from. And usually at the Folklife Festival, we have a foodways area. Now, there's a whole thing. If you've been online and looked at this, there are so many people who are creating their own products in a blender or in a for hair, for skin. And so we're hoping to do that. And the beauty schools are so important within the African American community. So the Will to Adorn project is ongoing even after the festival is over, and we will have a research tent this summer where we'll bring a lot of the young people we've been working with together to, so you can come to the festival and record your own oral history, your own sartorial autobiography. And it'll be a home. We'll hope to do some digital storytelling and really participate in these discussions. And our sponsors, we're working with the new African American Museum, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. We've had really wonderful funds from the craft research funds, from Smithsonian Institution, consortium funds. We're part of a larger consortium. And most recently, we just received a grant for youth access. So we will be working with two of our major partners, Mind Builders, and with McLaren High School in Atlanta, their videography program, to really trainers in how to take this project further with young people, so that we're really teaching people, young folks in the 8 cities, the tools for folk life and folklore research, so that they can continue the process, create their own exhibitions, create their own local projects. And so that's it. And I hope we have a little time for questions. But I really am so pleased to see all of you. I feel like, this is a conversation already in community. So thank you very much. So, questions, comments? Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to mention and ask, because I saw a lot about the hair, and that's a really big thing in our community: good hair, bad hair, no hair, locks. Now you see a lot of the female celebrities have blonde hair in our community, and we did we being a group of faith sisters, did a kind of a support group of women that had lots for about 10 or 15, 20 years. And so we got a lot of pictures, and we had one picture that was going to be a poster. And so I'd like to be able to give that to you at some point, Diana.
Oh, that's fabulous. In fact, we would welcome as also your participation in the project. And we do have a research site if folks are interested in, or have a project like yours, to join our research site. And so I think that would be great. Thank you so much.
Right. But I also wanted to just mention that, this discussion now is back up again around good hair. And I hear young people on the bus saying, well, he's got good hair, she's got good. And it just seems so sad that I thought we got away from that, and we're back to it.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about good hair was that at one point it was assumed that hair that was more European in looking, straightened hair and so on, was good hair, and hair like mine, was bad hair. And I think it was in the context of, again, being defined from outside a community, but also I think that it's interesting because it's become a real debate, because there is also the big chop, which is the movement among young people to cut off the straightened hair and become natural. But I also want to mention, and I thought that in addition to hair, a colleague and both in the project and at the Smithsonian said, well, there's not only hair, but there are many in our communities who choose to cover hair. So it's not, the conversation is not only about hair, but also about how important it is about head, and how important it is to the self-presentation as a whole and what that means. Yes.
I'm interested to know the most interesting insight that you had, or most surprising insight you had since working on the project.
That's a great question. Well, it's interesting because, I think it was about that conversation about the new demographics and the diversity within the African American, the internal diversity, and the need to have conversations about that, and how those conversations about dress lead to other important conversations. So that I think would be one of the most things, but also the complexity. I mean, there's billions and billions of dollars spent within the African American community. So it's a major, dress is major in terms of economics and in terms of entrepreneurship within the African American community. So, and there are other things, I mean, when the, it was interesting that the whole debate that happened with the tragedy with Trayvon Martin, there was that whole thing where Geraldo Rivera got online and said, well, if he wasn't wearing a hoodie. Well, the thing is that it's not necessarily, obviously it's not necessarily about wearing a hoodie. It's not going to solve the issue, but that whole debate about, what's appropriate dress and what's self-expression. Oh, one other thing was really interesting. The role of dress as protection. Another colleague interviewed a young man. He was wearing a saggy pants. He was wearing locks. He was, and she asked him, well, what's this? Why do you dress the way you do? And he was a father. He was interested, a young father. And he said, I dress this way because it's a form of protection. When I'm in my community, if I'm going dressing, some other way, I'm going to get beat up, or, my son's going to get beat, so I have a son to support, so it's really interesting. That was very surprising. Also, the dandy movement, that is an incredible movement. There's a whole new movement of young men, mostly college educated, who are creating, who are really into dress. Andre 2000, and gosh, who is it now? There's a movement in hip hop now towards wearing suits and wearing, really, really stylish clothing that W.E.B. Du Bois would have been really proud of, because he was also an exemplar of style. But the whole collegiate dress, that's actually something that I think is going past the hip hop. Yeah.
What did you give that name? Dandy?
Dandy, yeah. That African American dandies. Oh, sorry, African American dandies, and there's actually a dandy day. There was there's an exhibition that's been traveling around the country, curated by a brilliant young scholar, Chantrell Lewis, where she has been working with photographers to document these young men who are really into sartorial splendor. And there was a conference in Paris that I just came back from on Black portraiture, where they talked a lot about this, and it's really sort of a contrast to the hip hop movement that folks, the white T-shirts and the saggy pants. So it's really, really interesting. Oops, yes. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about that, and also watching your presentation about the documentary Paris is Burning. Have you thought about
Yes.
that? In that vein, the urban gay male perspective in dress?
Actually, that's really important, and we're hoping to have some of the founders of the House of LaBeija at the festival, and to do voguing, because again, the other thing is the African American style has had a global influence, and voguing has influenced runway. It's been influenced by, but it's also influenced runway. There's also gender, there's a lot, gender orientation becomes really a part of it, and looking at the cues within the African American community in terms of the LGBT movement, there are all sorts of sartorial cues and issues that come up, there, and we're hoping to get into some of these discussions this summer, which is very exciting. Back there, Eve. Yeah, hi.
Hi. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
There will be some discussion about the changing psychological impact of, I'm thinking about, hair in particular, locks. It used to be associated with Rastas, then now they're associated with thugs. So I had a friend who came from Jamaica who has very long locks, was not able to catch a cab. And he's like, what's the matter? And I said, not only do they not pick up black people, but, you know, you've got locks.
Yeah.
And, you know, that symbolizes, I don't know if it extends beyond this city, that's associated now with thug life, but also that locks have taken off as like the new canvas of hair expression.
That's right.
Because the locticians are doing some incredible things with locks where, you know, the purists used to always be like, you know, you just wear them, you don't curl them up,
Right.
wrap them up or whatever. Now they're going all over the place. They're pink and blue and, you know, and that's really very accepted. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also head wraps, because I remember people used to always tell me, don't wear a head wrap to work because of what it symbolizes. You know, people are going to think you're too cultural or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, you know, that kind of fell by the wayside. Now it's kind of coming back because I'm starting to hear again, don't wrap your head. So it's
Interesting.
interesting how the psychology's changed. At one point, you know, if you had locks, you were supposed to wrap your head. Now it's like, don't wrap your head, even if you have locks or whatever else. You know, you shouldn't wrap your head, and that's considered to be kind of like, you know, waning in style or something.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's all these cross currents. I don't know if you know that well, you know, well, interestingly enough, when I first considered getting locks, my mom, remember from from the West Indies, said, well, you know, you can't, you know, you don't want to be associated. I will not take you to Guyana because, you know, I don't want you to be associated with them Rasta people, you know. But, you know, now it's really interesting because the I have a relative who was in the Parliament of Bermuda, really conservative place, and he wore locks in Parliament. And it's interesting because it was in a place where they still wear wigs, you know, and he had white hair, so you know it just like there wasn't a lot of different, but you know, and in the Caribbean right now, you see that, you know, a lot more women are either in high places, are either wearing their hair very short or wearing their hair in locks. In fact, the university community, it's very popular. So I think, and as you say, locticians, I didn't know about that there was a word called loctician, you know, a few years ago, but now it's a major thing in hair shows, like the Bronner Brothers hair show, the Golden Scissors Awards, all these things. They have sections where it's about locks. There are natural hair shows. So we're hoping to have a natural hair show and sort of what I'm calling a sculptural hair show at the festival. Yes, Francine. Hi.
Tattooing. Considered that or
Yeah. You know,
adorning the body.
we're looking at tattooing, and one of the things in our class, Harold Anderson, who's a folklorist who worked with us for a long time and taught at Bowie State. We had a class called The Will to Adorn, and he said one of the most interesting things for him was that someone was described as someone who didn't have a tattoo, and you know, he said, boy, what a change, you know. So definitely, when we did the program last year, Olivia Cadaval was the curator for a program on Anacostia, and there was a tattoo artist, and we actually went to the studio and did an interview, and it was really interesting. Actually, in our interviews, there was a skater. He was in Atlanta, and he had tattooed in the inside of his mouth, and it was but it was related, he said, to speaking truth. So he had a whole philosophy around the tattoos that he had. So, you know, it's a very important symbol of identity for so many young people. Yes.
Just a comment about what you were talking about with colleges. My granddaughter goes to a HBCU college, and a lot of the HBCU colleges require that the students are dressed, are suited down, because when they do certain what movement I sort of came up with, that you dress a certain way for certain particular, events that you go to. And so I see that the college students really are picking up on that. It's just a movement that is almost like a requirement at a number of the HBCU schools to be dressed.
Yeah, actually, there's a long tradition. Long tradition. We did a course on Will to Adorn at Spelman, and of course, near to Morehouse, and it was really, really interesting. Spelman, you had to wear white gloves and you had to wear pearls, and as young women, it was a HBCU, historically black college and university, and so that was really, really important. But what's happening now is that even if you go on a regular day, Spelman women may be wearing jeans, but they're going to be wearing the most put together jeans. It was incredible. You look, on the Spelman campus, I felt like I was in a fashion shoot. But it's so that aesthetic, even though it's very different than it was before, is there. And there's also the fact that, again, there's the Afrocentric aesthetic. We interviewed Dr. Janetta Beck Cole, who's president of Spelman and Bennett, and who's now, we're very pleased to know, is to have her as director of the African Art Museum. And she has a very strong, she's one of our main exemplars of style, but within an African context. Her some of the people from whom she collects dress are Damali African Couture, and Damali is a incredible designer who works in Mali and Mauritania and Nigeria with textile artists and with sewers who are here to create really exceptional clothing, but with an African aesthetic. And then you get someone like Beulah Cooley, who is in Chicago, who's creating with sort of what when we say, definitely Western dress, who's in the Ebony Fashion Fair, but also who creates for the ladies of the church. So she will create something that's matching hat, matching shoes, and matching suit. And it's definitely, again, the attention to detail in dress, even though it's a different aesthetic. Yes?
Yes, you wanted to expound a little bit on our president and his influence in our culture?
Oh, ooh, wow, that's a biggie. But
About 5 minutes.
well, the thing that I think is really significant there is that, I go back to the conversation about diversity and the conversation about aesthetic. I mean, he is a real cool, put together brother. He's but and I think that he is in his own way. Although he's talked about Michelle Obama is often the person who's focused on in terms of her style, and she has great style. But what I think that is really amazing in terms of dress is that he projects not only the clothing, but how you wear the clothing, and I think that it's a real for me it's really interesting because there was a debate, when at one point when he was being elected about whether he is really African American and what that means. Well, the thing is that in terms of affect, in terms of dress, in terms of how he dresses, that's very much within an African American Chicagoan canon. And I think that, I think it's natural, but I think it's also that it's something that I don't think he's putting it on, obviously, but I think that it also projects a very important image within the nation as a whole. I could go on for another 5 minutes, but yes.
You speak of the African culture, but I'm from the southern side of it.
Okay.
And Indian culture is a lot of where I'm from. Okay. So we're
Glad you
gonna
mentioned
mix
that.
those two, and so a lot of the things that you see within my cult, or our sect anyway, has a lot to do with the Indian side.
Exactly.
But there's
Yeah.
still the African tendencies. And then people are like, well, and with us being military, we move around a lot.
Yeah.
And so we've moved it, and my daughter has noticed it a lot, especially my 14-year-old. She has really picked up on the culture here, and it seems to fit into where she is. But then she's also Italian, so her grandmother brought in the Italian fix to her. So I guess my biggest question is, how do I make sure she is seeing everything, and not just because of her skin tone, because she's bright, she has, as we would say, the good hair, but it's still African American hair. There's no way around it. I just need her to make sure she sticks within her boundaries. Or she can have any boundaries she wants, as far as I can. But I just need her to know that she can go to the southern side and be happy. Because, like I said, it's the Indian effects more there than this side. And I'm glad I attended this, because I really had no intent. But I'm like, okay, so I've learned different places I can take her and different, but I need her to see that being black is not all, being African American, excuse me, is not just because you have to be dark.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really important. I'm so glad that you brought that up, and especially also the folks who identify as African and Native American, and that's a really important thing. I mean, many of us have joint heritages, and whether it be sort of European and African, or Asian and African, or a combination of all of those. And again, it goes back to the thing that there are many ways to be African American, and it's about culture. It's not about biology. It's not only about biology. It's really, or even where you come from. Again, it gets back to the question, and this has been really contentious. When I was growing up, I remember, and this is not with dress, but with clothing, with food. I went to college during the 1968 to 1972 era, and I remember it was a time when people were talking about who's black, who's an Oreo, who's and folks would talk about things like, well, black people eat chitlins and collard greens and grits. I grew up in a family where we came home and we had a pepper pot. We had pepper pot on the stove, which is made with something. It's from Guyana. We ate curry and roti. We ate, peas and rice, But I didn't know what a grit was. And I certainly didn't know what, what chitlins were, but it was part of that searching for community, and it pointed to the importance of these symbols, but it also, and it was important for the era that we identify ourselves culturally as well. But I think that the issue for the 21st century is looking at, within the United States, is looking at the demographics and the wider sphere of what it is to be black, what it is to be African American. So I think that is the thing that, and coming from the South, there are regional differences. We went to New Orleans, we went to Chicago, New York. There are regional styles too, and they're all part of what this community, what the larger community is.
One more question?
Yeah. Okay, one more question. Eve, you asked the question already, so I just want to make sure that there's no other ones. Okay, and you asked the question too. Well, let me get Eve, because she asked, and you can also continue the conversation.
I get your opinion on something that I've observed, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But although people of African descent are not the only ones who do it, there seems to be a propensity of people of African descent to wear pattern on pattern clothes. Is this something that you've observed? Because I see it in Africa. I know my grandmother used to wear plaid pants and a polka dot shirt. She was Southern from Alabama. Didn't have any relationship with African culture. And I find myself doing it just not because my grandmother did it or not because it seems to be something that's kind of like ingrained.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, that actually, I've been looking at that since high school, you know. And it's really interesting because, you know, people do it a lot also in the Caribbean and all over the African world. And it's interesting because now, if you look at Paris and Milan and all this for 2013, all of a sudden everybody is like pattern on pattern. But I do think that it is very much part of African, you know, one of the sort of continuity African world is aesthetic kind of things. And I connect it to music. I mean, I connected to music in an interesting way. Just as we have polyrhythms in drumming and so on, I think there are polyrhythms, visual polyrhythms in dress. And I think that, you know, there are a lot of metaphors, a lot of places where music and dress have sort of parallel things going on, parallel aesthetics. And, you know, there are a lot of differences. I'm not saying that there are direct continuities, but there is an aesthetic there. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.